little later in the afternoon, but it's okay.
Yeah.
I got my Topo
And
Chico.
McKay,
I
I
got my
actually
sparkly
cannot see
water.
you.
Really? Am I not popping up?
I don't know why I'm struggling to see you. I see the
Uh-oh.
I see the backpacks and your coffee design. I just don't see you.
Is it? Is your internet already not working? So it's not a. Oh man, it wouldn't be a stream without some kind of just Fredo hiccup.
Here we go. There we go.
Oh man, I
Dude, it
love
wouldn't
how
be a
this.
proper stream if we didn't have a little bit of an issue.
That's exactly what I said as soon as you
Oh,
jumped
good,
out. I
good.
said this would not be. It wouldn't be virtual book club if you didn't just fumble something.
Fair, fair.
So we're hopefully this season the internet works for you.
We're good, bro.
Hopefully you stay connected to the digital world. So
I will.
we're gonna pray a blessing over that. We're gonna give people a few minutes to jump in here. Um, Fredo, how you doing today? It's been a minute since we've interacted with our online campus like this. How's your
Yeah,
summer been
yeah,
going?
dude. I'm doing good, man. You know, I had a conversation with a friend today about the kind of heat we're experiencing here right now in California, and he gently reminded me that at least we don't shovel our cars out of the snow.
Mm,
And I thought, okay, well that's a fair that's
yeah.
a fair thing. We'll take a handful of days where it's in very hot, like 105 hot, like
Hmm.
nasty hot. But I'm doing good.
If I had
Really good.
to shovel my car out to get to work, there's not a chance I'm making it in.
Yeah.
I can't even make it to work on time on a normal good day, let alone have to dig my car out to get there. It's just sorry, boss. I'm gonna have to
It's
work
not
from home.
happening. I remember so the first time I lived in Louisville, Kentucky, it was coming up on winter,
Hmm.
and I walked into a Walmart, and right out front, like the first thing you see when you walked in was like this massive box of what I didn't realize at the time, but they were windshield scrapers. I'm like,
Mm.
what are these, and why are they on sale, and why is everyone getting them? And then I realized that it gets so dang cold, you gotta scrape your windshield.
Yeah.
Never done that in my life.
Did you
Um,
drive a lot in Kentucky, or were you just campus living?
yeah, I mainly live like on campus, and yeah, I mean, I maybe drove like once or twice a week or so to a few spots, but
Hmm.
not a ton. So, but part of my job at this first church I was at as a volunteer, I would deliver a lot of like the materials, the paperwork, the kids stuff from one church location to another early in the morning. So one morning I had gotten up and my car thermometer had read like 7 degrees. I'm like, what am I doing? And I was going from one church to pick up like coffee, uh, all the kids' materials, the snacks, the bullet, like the church bulletins, all that stuff, and I was
Hmm.
delivering it to another one. That was at a Sojourn Community Church. So, shout out to little Sojourn, but that was like when, yeah, I did that as a volunteer for a little bit, but yeah,
Yeah,
freezing.
I think I would rather be in 105-degree weather like we are now than be in 7-degree cold.
Yeah,
Because like I don't even like doing ice baths. I don't like cryotherapy. I do not like being that cold. So when the air is that cold, I'm like, nah, forget about it.
yeah, that's rough, bro. That's a little rough.
Tyler, no, these are two poster frames of different coffee bags I've collected over the years. Some of them being cooler designs, some of them just being really good coffee. And Viv set them up. Viv, my wife, set them up in these frames. We hung them up. Just different places I've collected. A lot of Augie's because Augie's made great coffee. RIP to them. And then a
Hey
couple of other
guys,
ones that I've collected over the years. So it's cool stuff, but not
my
gift
kids just
cards.
got in here. How fitting. We're gonna be talking about being a dad, and my children walk in. Those are for your lunch, my love.
It's almost like you timed that. Like we all. It's almost like we timed that to work out perfectly.
Almost.
All right. So
Ella, I'm in a meeting.
for anyone in the chat, welcome back to our online virtual book club. Virtual book club is an attempt for our online audience to connect and read a book together as we would in a normal book club, except we're meeting on YouTube instead of in physical spaces. Our last reading, we read Every Day a Miracle by Pastor Matt Brown. I don't know why I said Pastor Matt Brown, as if they don't know who that is.
Formal name.
By Pastor Matt, yeah, I'm going super formal today. But we read his latest book. For this rendition, we are reading, drumroll, boom, whoops, Fathered by God, John Eldredge, and it's backwards because of my camera. But we are reading Fathered by Pastor Matthew Stephen Brown. Thank you, Scott. We are reading Fathered by God. If you have not yet picked up this book, I emailed out a Amazon link to everyone that signed up for this. To it on Amazon. It's only $10 right now. Definitely pick it up. We will be going over the introduction in chapter 1 next week, so you have plenty of time to read. And what we're going to do this edition of the book club that is different than the last one. Last time we went through 1 chapter a week. This time we'll be going over 2 chapters each week. So next week, introduction in the first chapter, chapters 2 and 3, 4 and 5, and so on for the next 6 weeks. I think that was the main stuff I wanted to cover. One more thing. As you are participating in this virtual book club and reading along with us, we recommend the best experience is obviously read the book and then interact in our chat. We have several of our staff and other readers in this chat as well. Drop questions, bring thoughts, bring notes. We'll be interacting with the chat as much as we can during this time. And hopefully all learning from each other and from this book that we're reading together. I think that's all I had. Fredo, have you read this book before?
I haven't, man. So I'm pretty excited to dive into it. So
yeah,
it's been, I think everyone, or mostly everyone, has got like that ideal book list, like stuff that they want to get to, and this has been one of those books on that list. Something I've definitely wanted to get to at some point. So eager to dive in.
When we picked this book, when our team was kind of going over the books to go over, this was, correct me if I'm wrong, we picked this during the hymn series, right? As when we were, as a church, beginning of summer, kind of going through what does it mean for biblical manhood and what God can teach us in that. Do you mind sharing some of your thoughts and heart, Fredo, as we were picking this book on why you wanted to kind of address some of these topics?
Yeah, I think, I think of that A.W. Tozer quote where he said, what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. So what comes to your mind when you think about God? And is it first that he's like a father and he's fathering you, And so I think that resonates still. It's an old quote, but I think it still rings true in our modern world, especially, a number of years ago, there was a study done out of Texas that the LA Times had gotten a hold of. And there was this article called, America believes in one God, but different views. And it was this idea that for a lot of people, they have this conception of God, or when they think about God, they think about this authoritarian figure. That's like one way to think about God. Like he's just this, authority figure who just oversees the world, judges the world. Another way that people kind of tend to think about God is that he's distant. So he maybe he made the world, but he kind of stands apart from it. And so he's not really involved with us. Another view of God is that he's incredibly critical. So he's kind of distant and he's not really, involved with the affairs of the world, but he is pretty critical of who we are as people, and I think those categories are really helpful because naturally we might go there ourselves when we think about God. And so this idea of being fathered by God, and even taking the words of Jesus when he said, this is how you should pray, our Father who art in heaven. And yes, my son was just pouring some cereal right now into a bowl in the middle of this. Come on, go ahead, buddy.
I love it.
What was my train of thought before I hear cereal hit the bowl?
Our Father in heaven, the Lord's Prayer.
Like Jesus, he first identifies God as Father when he's teaching us to pray. And so I think there's something to be said and discovered as it relates to relating to God as a father and allowing God the Father to actually raise us, in light of the family situation that we've all come out of. When you think about the role or the title father, I'm sure a lot of different things might come to mind. And so this idea of allowing God to father us is a really critical component of the Christian journey.
Yeah.
because so much of following Jesus is really about being reparented by God, and actually growing up in His family, the family that He's remaking in Jesus. And so there's something I think beautiful for all of us in this book, not just for people who want to be dads. I think people who are longing for a kind of relationship with their heavenly Father, and then I think just giving us a view of a divine Father who isn't isn't absent, who isn't abusive with his role or power,
Mm.
who's caring and compassionate. Like I just think about the hope of seeing men become well-rounded, like whole human beings.
Yeah.
And so there's so many, I guess, categories of like what we think a father would be or has been in our lives. And so I'm really looking forward to this book, as a way to call us into something beautiful, and I think restore this really important characteristic about God, which is that He is Father. He is our Father. And so, yeah.
Yeah.
How
That's
about you,
awesome.
man? What are some of the things that come to mind for you as you think about this idea of going through this book, Fathered by God?
Yeah. So I had actually, I'm sure I had heard of this book, in various church circles growing up, but I've never actually read this before. And as I was thinking about book club earlier today, getting ready, kind of preparing for this next rendition of this, I'm excited to dive into it because I think one thing that maybe it's just a millennial thing, but one thing millennials I feel like have done a really good job at is being more aware of the hurt and maybe trauma we've experienced in our lives. Like there's this
Mm,
massive awareness of this is what I grew up in, but I'm bigger than that, and trying to heal from it. Um, what I'm what I want to push young men into more is, yes, you may have experienced some hard things, but can you let God actually heal you from that? Because I feel like a lot of men will hold on to the things that have happened, but don't actually heal and move forward from it. They kind of let it
yeah.
define them. Um, and I'm hopeful that this book will kind of give us some of those tools and steps to say like, okay, this may have happened to you, but how is your heavenly Father growing you and challenging you and changing you from that, even though you've experienced these things? So
Yeah.
I'm very optimistic for this book. I'm very excited. I am a new dad. My son just turned 4 months old on Sunday, so
Eh,
naturally, naturally, everything I'm thinking through is now I'm like, oh, what kind of implication is this going to have on Zion as he grows up? How am I going to, raise and father him in some of these things? So I think it'll be
yeah.
great for the young men and the old men and all the men in our church, but I also think this would be great for anyone that knows a man and is trying to relate to them and figure out how to navigate this. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. On that note, too, there was a great comment. Tyler in the chat talked about, for me, I had a really hard time for a long time seeing God as Father because of what I thought a father was. And
Mm,
yeah, I think that's spot on. And so this I think presents us an opportunity to, I wouldn't say at all rebuild a vision of God, but I think just recover a biblical
mhm,
understanding of God as our Father, and then allow that to do its work in us too.
mhm,
But then Scott also mentioned, if we want to mature and move on into the next stage, we must be initiated into it, which is something that so many men miss out on in their lives. Dude, that's actually so
yeah.
critical. There's a phenomenal book recently written by pastor and author John Tyson called Intentional Fatherhood. And he actually
Mm,
walks through what Scott just mentioned, this kind of initiation process where you take, your boys through once they hit a certain age. I think it's like 12 or 13. And it
mhm,
really is that. It's an initiation. It's an identifying, a naming, a calling up into, this is who you are. This is how God has made you. And we
mhm,
want to cultivate all of that power, that strength in a way that actually leads to like a good life for you and a better life for the people around you. And so,
mhm.
yeah, it's a wonderful thing. And so, yeah, I'm excited to dive into this. And so I think there's all kinds of stories, good and bad, I think, about men and fathers. And so I think I'm hoping this book allows us to just retell a better story about what
Mhm.
it could be to be a father, and to see God as one. So
Yeah.
I'm excited.
I'm curious, do you remember any of those initiation moments with you and your dad or your father figures you had growing up?
Yeah, I think there wasn't necessarily anything formal my dad did. There were moments though where I felt like he was inviting me in to participate in the things that he was doing
Hmm.
that just kind of naturally were a kind of initiation where I felt like seen and appreciated. I was equipped with something, even though I wasn't
Hmm.
good at doing it yet.
Yeah.
Uh, whether it was like fixing something or just going along with him in some moment. And then I realized like out of those environments came like great conversations. So like right now I think about it, like I have incredibly fond memories of like my dad teaching us how to sail, and I'm
Mm.
really looking forward to actually like getting back out on a boat with him and just watching him work, because it's just so fun. And I'd love to like relearn some of the things he was trying to show us
Hmm.
at a young age though. But yeah, so much I think of that initiation can happen in really small things of just inviting them into the things you're doing and empowering them through that, can
Yeah.
can be really powerful. So
Yeah. Definitely. That I mean, it's kind of the same thing for me. My dad was a truck driver for a really long time, and I remember kind of end of elementary school, getting into middle school when that initiation stage kind of starts. Um, he would just bring me to work during the summers, and he worked nights at the time, so he was like, "All right, come on, you're going with me in the truck, and you're gonna help me unload and, um, do all that kind of stuff." So it was very similar, where it wasn't like a one singular moment, but as a bringing into something of like, no, you're a part of this and you can do this.
yeah.
And then I even think of my grandpa, my mom's dad, who he spent tons of time with me and my brother. And um, every year we go out to Long Beach for the races out there. And it started when I was 18 and finally allowed enough to volunteer. But we volunteer at these races where it's really just a time for us to hang out and get closer to these race cars than anybody else. But at 18, 19, 20, entering my young adulthood phase, there was so much time within that weekend that it was just very naturally talked about what I'm called into and talking about school and career choices and stuff like that. And it was less teaching and more just um, affirmation, like building me up and like, oh, yeah, no, I can take these next steps. And I would talk
Yeah,
about how hard college was. And he would just kind of encourage me and push me through that. And in ways that was just different than what I experienced from everybody else. So
that's great, man.
yeah,
Those are good
and it,
things to cherish for sure.
yeah, yeah, and it's one of those. I think it's one of those neat things that it's as guys we can maybe overthink trying to plan something like that, but then as the son that's receiving it, it's like no, this was so simple that it works. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Scott said his initiation moment was one where his dad was trusting him with tools and telling me I had what it took to do it, which is definitely a big thing.
Mm.
Because my dad was always like, "You drop this tool and break it, your butt's getting whooped." So to be equipped to be able to use the tools, it's like, all right, I'm sweating, but we're gonna figure this one out.
Yeah.
Zach said, I remember when my dad had me start mowing the yard. It felt so legit. Okay, honestly though, that is a true thing because I remember watching my dad mow the yard and thinking it was the coolest thing ever. And then once I was told, yeah, you could do this, it wasn't that cool. But it's that same thing where I was like, great, I just gave myself another chore. But yeah.
Yeah, for us, we didn't have much of like a grass kind of yard because of where we grew up. It was more like kind of rocks and dirt and stuff, but weeds. I remember like pulling weeds, going out and pull weeds with him was like, oh, you go out there and you smell like this mustard seed weed, which is like what grew all over the place. But there was once you got past like the 10 minutes of like bickering and complaining, it was actually like a pretty
Mhm.
legit thing to do. Like you felt like pretty tough. Like, dang, I just pulled the weeds, and not just the top of the weed. You dug
Yeah,
deep. You
you
got
got to
that
get the
root.
root.
You
Yeah.
got to get that root,
Hmm.
and if you didn't get that root, then you were in
Yeah,
trouble.
get out the little hand shovel and start digging because
Yeah, yeah,
you had to get that out. Yeah,
yeah,
I remember that one as well.
yeah.
Well, cool. I'm sorry. What what was the other thing you wanted to touch on for this introduction? We were talking about it beforehand, and I can hear Zion crying, so I'm like kind of going
Oh
blank a
man,
little bit. Um, oh my gosh, I'm blanking.
yeah. I can't remember Just we talked through the ways that maybe we naturally view God.
Oh yes, thank you. That's where I wanted to go, because as you were listing those off, I was looking at the article and reading. He has this, what's his name, Steve Padilla. He gave 4. He said the authoritarian God, benevolent, distant God, and critical God. Now this article is from 2006, so some time has passed. I don't doubt that there's people that still view God this way.
Oh,
But
100%.
as I'm looking at this, I don't know if I see God in one of these, but in various times of my life, I feel like I've experienced him in all 4. What would you say as a pastor to someone kind of struggling through these different views of Gods that might not actually align to who he is?
Yeah, I mean, I think depending on where they tend to default, I think it's okay to acknowledge like, oh wow, I naturally view God like this, or I naturally tend to relate to God like this, right? Like even as a pastor, and more importantly as a Christian, like someone who's following Jesus, I tend to relate to God like with a little suspicion, in the sense that like, if something bad is about to happen, like if I get sick, I'm like, God, are you judging me? Like what, are you displeased with me? Or just yesterday, a light turned green for me to go across the intersection, but as it turned green, 2 cars like flew by, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, like, Lord, are you trying to get me? What's going on? Like, and so I kind of have like this suspicion, like maybe God's out to get me. And so I think it's okay just to maybe name it, right? Like that's what would be my first advice. Just acknowledge maybe how you like naturally relate to God, or how you naturally view him. And then you got to allow scripture and really Jesus to like help repicture who God is to us. The Bible says that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. So like to see Jesus is in fact to see God, and to understand that he is compassionate, he's merciful, he's loving, he's understanding, and so depending on where you're at, if you tend to think God is distant, well, again, consider the person Jesus who actually came to us, right? Like the Christian religion is far less about how we get to God, but really how God got to us. If you tend to think God is judgmental, I would say, well, you're right to say that God actually has a standard, a righteous standard. But again, you look at the life of Jesus as the one who gives himself for those who can't meet that standard, right? And he's really the righteous one who dies for the unrighteous. That's the good news of the gospel. And so there's hope there, and if you tend to think, God is critical, maybe there's a chance for you to like deal with maybe some perfectionism, if that's there within your heart, a sense of guilt maybe that's lingering, or honestly, like maybe you had parents who were potentially controlling and demanded a lot of you, had a really high standard of you, and like no matter how hard you worked, you never got it right.
Right.
And it's like, so it's okay to, I think, acknowledge those things, but then again, allow scripture to reframe some of those things, and to consider like the beautiful gift of grace for our imperfections, and for the gaps of our lives, and so I think starting at any one of those places is not always a bad thing, and it doesn't mean you're a bad person. I think it just means, okay, where do we go from here? And thinking about aspects of scripture, who Jesus is, what he's done for us, to help paint the full picture of who God truly is, And of course, that fourth category, like you mentioned, is benevolence, right? I think there is something to be said for a God who is very caring and compassionate, but does that compassion move you to become compassionate, right? Like, in other words, it might be common for us to meet a lot of people here in the West who like have this idea of like, all right, if God's a father, he's compassionate, but like, I don't know if I belong to him or if I owe him anything, And so there is a way to view him as like, oh, he's just so loving and understanding, but then to reject the fact that he actually invites you to follow him and to die to aspects of yourself that aren't good for you, and to take on his way of life, So yeah, I think all of those categories are really helpful because they speak to certain things about human experience, and maybe even aspects of God's character, but they're not the full story, or maybe they're a bit twisted. And so that's how I might encourage someone.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, I resonate, and I feel that. As I'm thinking and like hoping that our readers and our audience out of this one, naturally addressing fatherhood and potentially father wounds, that takes a lot of work
Yeah.
out of everybody. So I would encourage all of our readers, every time you read, just kind of ask God, like, hey, God, how do you want to meet me in these spaces? What
Mhm.
about you do I need to unlearn and reveal reveal yourself to me in this reading? I believe that when we ask God to do that, he does. And I think sometimes when we have dad wounds or, wounds from other men in our lives, it's easier to hold on to those things than to let go and let God heal in that, because that
Mhm.
does require a lot of grace, and it does require a lot of forgiveness and patience for other people, which just
Yeah.
flat out isn't always the easiest thing to do, especially with some of these situations. Um,
Yeah.
so I encourage all of our listeners, take some time, um, to really sit with what we're going to be reading. Don't just kind of blow through it. If
Mhm.
you are not caught up in the reading by the time we do these streams, don't worry, they're going to live on YouTube afterwards. You can always go back and read them as well. But I think those are what you said of like allowing God to reveal who he is and reshape how we view him is so key
Mhm.
and essential to this. Because
Yeah.
I also think of and wonder of the person that has, maybe some religious father wounds. We're all sinners trying to figure out how to follow Jesus. That doesn't mean we figure these things out perfectly, and there can be hurt
Yeah.
from religious parents as well. So
Oh gosh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that I think that yeah, that's so important too, is to be able to distinguish how your father in heaven is not who was poorly portrayed, and even some spiritual parents you had, or some
hmm
people who were at a church who were like kind of parents to you, but
hmm
let you down at some point, or yeah, didn't do what they should have done, with you. And so yeah, I think that's real critical. And I love your point about too, like just offering those things to God and being open to how He meets you in those spaces. Because at the end of the day, uh, God is not hypothetical. This idea of being fathered by God is connected deeply to this idea that God is a relational God. Like He actually desires to relate to us and to know us. And maybe your father was burdened by you and your questions and your nagging, but our father is not. Our father in heaven is not burdened by us, and so our relationship to him is not a burden to him. It does not exhaust him. He actually
hmm
longs for it.
hmm
And so there's a profound invitation, I think, to bring all of those things before him, and let him do what he does best
hmm
as our father. So
yeah, that's good. Cool, man. Well, chat, if you guys have any questions about this book or some things that you want us to address, feel free to drop those here.
yeah.
This first episode is a lighter one. It's always a little bit lighter as we kind of prepare our audience and our book club for this. I wanted to give time because there was some people that signed up a little last minute, to still get a copy of this book. Like I said, there is a version on Amazon. That's only $10. I looked at it before this. If you order it right now, it'll get to you tomorrow. Let's see. Tyler asks, so how many chapters are we reading for next week? We'll be going
2.
over 2 chapters, including the introduction. I know some people don't consider the introduction a chapter, but we're going to read the introduction and chapter 1. So be prepared for 2 chapters a week. If you filled out the form and signed up for this virtual book club, I will be emailing you hopefully every Sunday, at the latest every Monday, with the reading for the week and giving a touch base on what we discussed last week. So be prepared to look for those emails. They'll come from me. Please don't send them to your spam folder. Scott asked, have you guys done any research into the various stages of manhood in the book? If so, which stage do you think you guys are in right now? So Scott is referencing in the table of contents, there's different stages, and each chapter is named that. There's the boyhood, cowboy, warrior, lover, king, and sage. Fredo, you're definitely at the sage part of your life, I think,
I don't think
because you're
so.
you're basically a spiritual father to me, so you've got to be at that stage part.
Well, thank you for that, but I don't think that's the case.
um
I haven't read. Yeah, I haven't looked at them, so that's exactly what I'm like really eager to dive into and explore. So Hopefully, by the
Looking
end of this, Scott, I will have a good answer for you.
looking at these titles, I'm assuming it's like youngest into oldest. I would honestly say I'm probably in the cowboy phase, but I also don't know what the different phases mean or stages. And I don't even know if a cowboy would be an accurate depiction of me, but it sounds cool, so I'm going to take cowboy.
McKay on a horse, baby. Giddy up.
So I'm excited to jump in. We'll see where this takes us and how this goes. The chapters are a little bit longer than Pastor Matt's book, but
Don't scare the readers, McKay. Don't scare the readers with that.
you got 7 days. Just bang out like 10 pages a day, and that's enough to get through it all.
Yeah.
Coffee cowboy.
Yeah, definitely. He's giving heavy coffee cowboy for sure.
I'll take that. Scott says it's an easy read, so it's gonna be a pretty fast read, hopefully.
All right.
Not too many
Looking
pages.
forward to
But,
it.
well, it's one of the books that was hard for Scott to put down.
Ooh.
That's good to know, Scott. I like that. Guys, again, kind of like I said earlier, interact with the chat, interact with all these different people here. We're gonna try to have as much of this interaction as we can. It'll be every Tuesday from now until September 10th at 4:30 California time. I don't know the exact accurate anymore, but
PST.
4:30 PST. I don't know when it changed, why it changed, but 4:30 PST. If you miss a live stream, these will live on our YouTube account. I'll title them for the chapters that we're in. You can go back. You should still be able to see the chat and be able to see what people put down. Yeah, I really think that's all I got. I don't know if I have much more for this one.
It's been great, man. I'm excited to dive in.
Awesome.
See y'all
Well,
next week.
Sandals Church Online, we love you. We'll see you next week.